The orange stake on my father's lawn. The first time I met Marlene Pritchard, she was hammering a stake into my father's lawn. Orange, 20 inches tall, big black letters on the flag. Violation, vacate, 24 hours. She drove it in with a rubber mallet, 3 hard swings, like she was killing something. I was standing in the driveway with a cardboard box in my hands. My father's reading glasses were on top. He had been dead for 6 weeks. A tow truck idled at the curb. A uniformed security guard stood beside it, raising a phone, photographing my pickup from 3 different angles. The plate, the bumper, the windshield. Click, click, click. Marlene didn't look up from her clipboard. Unapproved vehicle, unauthorized occupant. Structure, non-compliant, she read out loud, in the voice of a woman who enjoyed reading things out loud. Sir, you'll vacate within 24 hours, or you'll be removed. I set the box down on the porch. Slowly. The way you set down something fragile when you don't want to break what's inside it, or what's inside you. This was my father's house, I said. He passed in March. I'm the executor. She finally looked at me. Sunglasses pushed up on a tight gray bob. A little gold pin on her lapel that said President. The same expression I'd seen on 100 small-town clerks who had finally gotten the title they'd been chasing their whole life. I don't care who your father was, she said. This is HOA property. You don't have a key card. You don't have approval. You don't belong here. The security guard kept clicking. I want you to picture that for a second. A man in his 50s, standing on the lawn his father had mowed for 40 years, holding a box of his father's glasses, while a stranger photographed his truck and another stranger told him he didn't belong. I didn't say anything. I just watched her. She mistook the silence for fear. You're trespassing on land that has belonged to this association for 32 years, she said. Loud enough for the guard to hear. Loud enough for the neighbor across the street to hear. Try me. 32 years. I almost smiled. I almost did. Because 32 years was an oddly specific number, and I happened to know exactly where she got it. It was the term written into a document she had clearly never read. A document that was sitting on the seat of the same pickup the guard was photographing, inside a manila envelope marked Estate Real Property. But I didn't smile. I kept my face flat, the way my father used to keep his when a man was about to embarrass himself. Photograph the truck, she said to the guard. Sharper now, performing for me. Every angle, plate visible. We'll need it for the file. There's already a file, I said. She blinked. Excuse me? You said we'll need it for the file. There's already one. Several, actually. She squared her shoulders. The guard looked uncertain for the first time. Sir, she said, her voice slowing the way teachers slow their voices for children. I am the president of the Oak Ridge Estates Association. We have managed this community for over 3 decades. I would suggest you collect your things, and we can discuss your removal in a civil manner. I looked past her, at the orange stake in the grass, at the rectangle of my father's lawn it was driven into, at the tow strap the operator was pulling out of his rig at the curb, at the security guard, still clicking. Then I looked at the roof lines beyond hers, the roof lines of Oak Ridge Estates, house after house after house, all the way to the ridge. 287 of them, if I remembered the lease correctly. And I always remembered the lease correctly. Take all the photos you want, I said. You'll need them. She tilted her head, like a bird that had heard a sound it didn't recognize. Is that a threat? It's a suggestion. I picked up the box of my father's things. I walked past her, past the orange stake, up the 3 porch steps my father had poured himself in 1979. At the door, I turned and looked back at her one more time. She was already on her phone, talking to someone, jabbing a finger at my truck like she was pointing out evidence at a crime scene. The guard was nodding. The tow operator was cinching his strap. I stood there with my hand on the screen door, and I let myself think one quiet thing. She had no idea she was hammering her own eviction notice into my grass. Inside, the house smelled like my father. Pipe, tobacco, old books, a little coffee. I set the box on the kitchen table. Through the window above the sink, I watched Marlene direct the guard to photograph the side of the house, the carport, the tool shed, the fence line. I let her work. I sat down at the kitchen table where my father had eaten breakfast for 42 years, and I opened the manila envelope. The first document on top was the deed. Walter J. Cole, fee simple owner, 1,300 acres. Recorded August 1973. My father's signature in the kind of handwriting they used to teach in school. I closed the envelope. I looked out the window at Marlene Pritchard, president of the Oak Ridge Estates Association, standing on grass that did not belong to her association, putting a violation flag in dirt that did not belong to her association, telling the son of the man who actually owned it that he didn't belong. And I let the thought finish itself. Every single one of these homes pays me rent now. They just don't know it yet. A car door slammed outside. The tow truck pulled away from the curb without my pickup. The operator had finally checked his paperwork and noticed that the driveway he'd been told to tow from was deeded private, not common area. Marlene shouted at him. He shrugged and left. She marched back across the lawn toward her own car, ripping off her sunglasses. As she passed the orange stake, she pointed at it without looking back. "That stays," she barked. 24 hours. Or we lean. The screen door clicked shut behind me. I stood in my father's kitchen, with my father's deed on my father's table, looking at a flag in my father's lawn that said I had to leave. And for the first time in 6 weeks, I felt the grief lift just enough to make room for something else. Not anger. Not yet. Just a very, very quiet kind of patience. I pulled out my phone. I scrolled to a number I had saved the day after the funeral but hadn't dialed yet. Daniel Reyes Estate Council. He let it ring. Outside, the orange stake stood in the lawn like a little flag of war, and Marlene's car pulled away, and I knew with the calm certainty of a man who has just been handed a weapon his enemy doesn't know exists that she had picked the wrong house, on the wrong street, in the wrong subdivision, on the wrong piece of dirt, and she had no idea yet, but she would. Seen to Walter's land. Marlene's kingdom. I waited until her car was gone before I went back outside. The orange stake was still there, leaning a little in the soft dirt where she'd hammered it. I left it. I wanted it where it was. I wanted to see how long she would let herself believe it meant something. I walked the property line instead. You have to understand what my father had here. Not what the HOA thought he had. What he actually had. In 1973, my father, Walter J. Cole, a quiet man with a county engineer's salary and a stubborn streak the size of Texas, bought 1,300 acres of cattle pasture from an old rancher named Hollis, who was tired of fighting drought. He paid for it in installments over 11 years. He did not borrow against it. He did not subdivide it. He held it the way a certain kind of man holds land, like it was a member of the family that hadn't been born yet. For 19 years, it was a working cattle operation. Then, in 1992, a developer called Ridgeline Homes came to his door. Ridgeline didn't want to buy. They wanted to lease. Specifically, they wanted to lease 1,297 of the 1,300 acres for 50 years, build a planned community on it, sell the houses to private buyers, and keep the underlying ground rented from my father at a flat annual rate. They called it a ground lease. My father called it strange. His attorney called it perfectly legal and surprisingly common. He signed it on the 14th of April 1992, recorded at the county courthouse the same week. Term, 50 years. Expiration, April 2042. Ridgeline built 287 houses on his dirt and called the development Oak Ridge Estates. They incorporated a homeowners association to manage the streets in the common areas and the rules. They sold every last lot. Then, in 2004, Ridgeline dissolved as a company and assigned the ground lease the obligation to pay my father to the very HOA that had been formed to manage the place. So for 20 years now, the Oak Ridge Estates Association had been writing my father a single annual check, $14,200, for 1,300 acres of subdivision dirt. I stood at the edge of his back fence and looked out over what had once been pasture and was now a sea of two-car garages, and I let that number sit in my chest for a while. $14,000. The HOA collected more than that in fines and assessments in a single quarter. Marlene's monthly stipend as president was probably half of it. My father never raised the rent once. Not in 32 years. Not because he couldn't. Because he didn't want to be the man who did. I walked back toward the house. Mr. Ellis was at his mailbox. 3 doors down, a wiry man in his late 70s, with a Marine Corps cap and the careful posture of someone who'd outlasted 3 HOA presidents. He raised a hand. I raised one back. He waited until I was close enough that he didn't have to shout. "You're Walter's boy," he said. Not a question. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry about your dad. He was a good man. Thank you." He glanced past me at the orange stake on my lawn, his mouth pulled tight. "She moved fast on you?" "Within 40 minutes of the moving truck." He nodded slowly. "Listen to me. I've lived in this neighborhood since 2001. I'm going to tell you one thing." He leaned in slightly. "Whatever you do, don't sign anything that woman puts in front of you. Not a waiver. Not a settlement. Not a Christmas card. Nothing. Understood?" He held my eye for a second longer than was comfortable. "She took the Henderson widow's house." "Excuse me?" 2 years ago, Mrs. Henderson. Her husband died. She fell behind on a fence paint violation, $1,200 in fines. By the time it was over, the HOA had a lien on her house, and she sold for 50 cents on the dollar to get out from under it. Marlene bought a new SUV 3 months later. He shook his head. "I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying, I appreciate you telling me, Mr. Ellis. It's just Henry." "Henry." He looked at the orange steak again. "She tell you the land's hers?" I almost laughed. "She told me it had belonged to the association for 32 years. His eyebrows went up a quarter inch. That was as close as a man like Henry Ellis got to surprise. "Has it?" he asked, watching my face. "No, sir." He didn't ask another question. He just nodded, slow, and went back to his mailbox. But I saw it. The small, careful filing of information. The way certain men store a fact for later use. Inside, I cleared off my father's kitchen table and emptied the manila envelope across it. The 1,973 deed, his signature still sharp on the page. The 1,992 ground lease, 50 pages of clean ridgeline boilerplate, recorded stamp on the cover. The 2004 assignment, transferring the lessee's obligations from Ridgeline to the Oak Ridge Estates Association, signed, on behalf of the HOA, by a board president whose handwriting was much less confident than my father's. 20 years of canceled rent checks, paper clipped together by quarter. A ledger in my father's hand, every payment logged in pencil. 14,200. 14,200. 14,200. And then, near the back of the lease, on a page my father had folded down at the corner 32 years ago and never unfolded, there was a clause. Section 7.4, rent adjustment upon transfer of fee simple owner. I read it 3 times. In plain English, what it said was this: when ownership of the underlying land transferred to a new fee simple owner which, after probate cleared, meant me, the new owner, had the right to adjust the annual ground rent to current fair market value, with 30 days written notice to the lessee. No vote. No negotiation. No HOA approval required. The clause had been written in 1992 by a developer's lawyer who had assumed, reasonably, that the underlying landowner would stay the same forever. They hadn't planned for Walter's son. I sat with that for a long time. I am, by training, a civil engineer. I spent 31 years reading easements, plats, surveys, and ground leases for a living. I have read clauses like section 7.4 inches, maybe 200 different documents. I have never, in 3 decades, seen one with this much teeth on it. 30 days. No veto. No cap. Fair market value. Owner's discretion. A developer's mistake. Frozen in amber for 32 years. Waiting for the right grandson. I looked up from the table and out the kitchen window. The orange steak was still leaning in my father's lawn. Marlene's car was long gone. A neighbor across the street walked her dog past and stared at the flag for a full 10 seconds before walking on, the way you stare at something you've been told not to look at. I picked up my phone again. Reyes had texted me back during the walk. "In office Monday. Bring everything." I texted him one line. "Bring an appraiser too." I put the phone down. I looked at the deed. I looked at the lease. I looked at the ledger in my father's pencil. 20 years of $14,200 payments. The same number, every year, never adjusted, never argued. Marlene Pritchard had spent the morning telling me this land had been hers for 32 years. She had hammered a flag into it and threatened to lien a house she did not own the ground beneath. She had photographed my truck on a driveway her association rented from my dead father, and she had no idea, no earthly idea, that the woman whose name was on every quarterly check the HOA wrote was the woman whose deed was sitting on my kitchen table. I closed the lease. I tapped the corner of the folded page where section 7.4 lived. $14,000, I said out loud, in my father's empty kitchen, to no one in particular, for 1,300 acres. I almost smiled. That's about to change. Scene 3. The lien letter and the clubhouse court. The certified mail came on Saturday. 3 envelopes, all from the Oak Ridge Estates Association, all stamped urgent response required. I signed for them at the door. The mail carrier gave me the look mail carriers give you when they already know what's inside. I sat down at my father's kitchen table and opened them in order. The first was a schedule of violations. 4 counts. Unapproved vehicle on premises, $1,500. Exterior storage non-compliance, $1,250. That was my father's tools in the carport, the same tools that had been there since the Reagan administration. Unauthorized occupancy without board interview, $1,000. Late submission of ownership transfer paperwork, $1,000. Total, $4,750. Due in 14 days. The second was a notice of intent to lien. Standard form, 30 days from receipt, or the association would record a lien against the property and pursue all available remedies up to and including foreclosure proceedings. The third was a personally signed letter from Marlene. 1 sentence. We've done this before, and we'll do it again. I read it twice. Then I folded all 3 letters back into their envelopes, walked over to the manila folder I'd labeled Oak Ridge Receipts, and slid them inside, in order, with the date written on the top corner of each. Reyes had told me on the phone Monday, "Don't argue with anything. Don't respond to anything. Just file it. Every fine they invent after this point is going to become evidence." The Wednesday board meeting was at 7. I went. The clubhouse sat at the end of Oak Ridge Drive, a cream-colored building with a stone facade and a sign out front that read, "Residents Only." The parking lot was half full. Inside, fluorescent lights, folding chairs, a long table at the front, a small American flag drooping in the corner, maybe 40 people. Most of them looked tired in a specific way I'd seen before, the way people look in a small church run by the wrong pastor. Marlene sat at the center of the long table in a blazer, flanked by 4 other board members, and a woman with a steno pad who I assumed was the secretary. There was a wooden gavel in front of her that I'm fairly sure was decorative, until she got her hands on it. I took a folding chair near the back. I didn't bring a folder. I didn't bring an attorney. I brought a notepad and a pen. Marlene called the meeting to order at 7:03 and proceeded to run it like a small court that had never been told it wasn't one. She started with a Mrs. Kowalski about a mailbox color. Mrs. Kowalski had repainted her mailbox post the wrong shade of beige. $1,250 in fines. Mrs. Kowalski, who looked about 65, tried to say something about an approved color chart from 2018. Marlene cut her off. "Ma'am, the chart was updated. You should have checked." Gavel. Next. She moved to a young couple about a basketball hoop. The hoop was, technically, 3 inches inside the front setback. $600, and an order to remove the hoop within 7 days. The wife looked at her husband. The husband looked at the floor. Gavel. Next. She moved to a man about a non-compliant garden gnome. I am not making that up. The gnome was apparently above the permitted height for decorative ornamental figures. The man, who had brought the gnome with him in a cardboard box, just nodded and signed the violation form. Gavel. Next. I watched it all, and I took notes. Not the violations. The faces. The way Mrs. Kowalski's hands shook when she sat back down. The way the young husband mouthed something to his wife that looked like "we can't fight her." The way Henry Ellis, sitting 2 rows ahead of me in his Marine Corps cap, didn't move a single muscle the whole time but watched Marlene the way a man watches a snake he's already decided to deal with later. 45 minutes in, Marlene reached the open floor portion and looked directly at me. "We have a new resident in the community," she said, in a tone that managed to make new resident sound like bedbug. "Mr. Cole, Walter Cole's son. Mr. Cole, you've been served notice of multiple violations and a lien letter. Did you have a statement before we proceed?" I stood up. I'm not a tall man, but I have my father's posture, and I have what my wife used to call my courtroom voice, which is just my normal voice with the volume turned down 2 clicks. "I have one question, Madam President." She smiled the smile of a woman who enjoyed questions. "Go ahead. Can the board produce documentation showing the Oak Ridge Estates Association owns the underlying land of this subdivision?" The fluorescent lights hummed. Marlene's smile did something complicated. It tried to stay where it was, then it tried to move, then it settled into a kind of frozen approximation of itself. "Mr. Cole," she said, "we are this subdivision." "That isn't what I asked." "Sit down, sir. I'd like the record to reflect that I requested documentation of fee, simple ownership of the underlying land of Oak Ridge Estates, and was denied." The secretary's pen had stopped moving. She looked at Marlene. Marlene looked at the secretary. "Strike that," Marlene said. "He's out of order." "Madam President, you can't strike a question from the open floor portion of a public meeting. This is a private association meeting, open to all homeowners in good standing. I'm a homeowner. My question stands." The room had gone very quiet. The young couple with the basketball hoop had turned all the way around in their chairs. Henry Ellis was looking at the floor, but I could see the corner of his mouth moving in something that was not quite a smile. Marlene lifted the gavel. "Mr. Cole, sit down. Now, will the secretary note that my question was refused entry into the minutes?" "Sit down." "Noted," I said. I sat. She moved on, fast, to other business. Insurance renewal, pool hours, a discussion about whether the holiday lights could be up before December 1st, which apparently was an annual war. I stopped listening. I wrote one line on my notepad. She refused to record the question. She'll be asked about that under oath. The meeting adjourned at 8:47. I waited near the door while people filed out. Henry Ellis passed me, nodded once, and kept walking. Mrs. Kowalski passed me without looking up. The young couple passed me with the husband's hand on the small of his wife's back, the way you walk someone out of a hospital. I was the second to last person out of the building. Marlene was waiting for me in the parking lot. Two of her board members on either side of her like she'd brought backup for a fistfight. The lot was mostly empty. The sodium lights buzzed overhead. "Mr. Cole," she said. A word. I stopped about 10 feet from her. "I don't know what little stunt you think you pulled in there," she said, "but let me be very clear with you. You have 14 days to pay your fines. You have 30 days before we lien this house. We have foreclosed on properties before. We will do it again. Don't think your father's name is going to protect you from anything." She took half a step closer. Ask the Henderson widow how that worked out. The two board members stood with their arms crossed, trying to look like men who had ever foreclosed on anything. I let the silence hold for a beat. I have learned, over a long professional life, that silence is the cheapest form of pressure you can apply to someone who has just said something they shouldn't have on the record. "Mr. Ellis told me about Mrs. Henderson," I said quietly. Her face flickered. "I'm sure Mr. Ellis tells a lot of stories." "He does. He kept the file." She blinked. The board member on her left shifted his weight. I unlocked my truck, opened the driver's door, and paused with my hand on the frame. I looked back at her under the sodium lights. "Marlene," I said, "you might want to check your association's mail this week." "Is that a threat?" I got in. I closed the door. I started the engine. I rolled the window down 3 inches and said, just loud enough for the three of them to hear, "It's a courtesy." Then I drove out of the parking lot, past the residents only sign, past the orange stake still standing in my father's lawn, past 287 houses that none of them knew were sitting on dirt that had a new owner. In the rear view, Marlene was still standing in the parking lot, watching my taillights, and for the first time since I'd met her, she wasn't holding a gavel or a clipboard or a flag. She was holding nothing. And that, I thought, was the right amount. Scene 4, Section 7.4. And the quiet door-to-door. Monday morning, I drove into town with the manila envelope on the passenger seat and a thermos of coffee in the cup holder. First stop was the county recorder's office. A small woman behind a counter, half glasses on a chain, the smell of old paper and toner. I asked for certified copies of 3 documents. The 1,970, 3 deed in my father's name. The 1,990, 2 ground lease between Walter J. Cole and Ridgeline Homes, Incorporated, and the 2004 assignment of that lease to the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. She typed for a minute, raised an eyebrow, and disappeared into the back. She came out 15 minutes later with a stack of certified copies, each one stamped, sealed, and signed, $42 total. "You're Walter's son," she said as she handed them over. "Yes, ma'am. He used to come in here every 5 years and ask us to confirm everything was still on file. Said he didn't trust banks." She gave me a small, dry smile. "Tell him hello for me. He passed in March." Her face shifted. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." "Thank you." She held the receipt for a second longer than she needed to. "Is something happening with the Oak Ridge land?" "Something might be." She nodded once. Slow. He'd want it done right. "Yes, Mom. I intend to." Reyes's office was 3 blocks over, on the second floor of a brick building that used to be a feed store. Daniel Reyes had been my father's attorney for 26 years. He was 61, wore reading glasses that he constantly forgot were on his head, and had the kind of unhurried calm that made expensive lawyers in big cities look frantic by comparison. He had the lease open on his desk before I sat down. Section 7.4, he said, tapping the page. Section 7,4. He read it out loud once, just for the record between us. Then he closed the lease and folded his hands. Plain English. When fee simple ownership transfers which just happened to you, the moment probate cleared, the new owner has the right to adjust the annual ground rent to fair market value. 30 days written notice. The lessee, that's the HOA, has no veto. They signed this in 1992, thinking it would never matter. How much teeth on it? All of them. The clause is clean. There's no cap, no arbitration trigger, no consent requirement. It's not even ambiguous. The drafter assumed the underlying landowner would always be the same family, with the same patience your father had. He took off his glasses and set them on the desk. Your father had a lot of patience. I'm assuming you have less. I have a different kind. He almost smiled. We need an appraisal. Fair market ground rent for 1,300 acres of fully developed subdivision dirt. I have someone. I can have her on it by tomorrow. Do it. 3 to 5 business days for a defensible number. While we wait, I want every fine letter and lien notice they've sent you, every certified mailing, and any photographs you have of their conduct, especially anything from this week. I slid the Oak Ridge receipts folder across his desk. He flipped through it for 90 seconds. He stopped at Marlene's one-line letter. We've done this before, and we'll do it again. He read it twice. He looked up at me over his reading glasses, which had migrated back onto his head. She wrote this? Signed it. On association letterhead? Yes. He set it carefully back into the folder, the way you set down a piece of evidence you didn't have to ask for. She's going to wish she hadn't. The appraiser called him on Wednesday afternoon. I was at my father's kitchen table with the windows open, the orange steak still leaning in the lawn outside. Reyes put it on speaker. Her name was Caitlin Park. She had spent 2 days pulling comps on developed subdivision ground leases across 3 counties, cross-referencing per-acre fair market rates for residential ground rent, adjusting for the age and density of Oak Ridge estates. She talked the way good appraisers talk: flat, specific, no theater. Defensible fair market ground rent for the Oak Ridge estates parcel, given the current improvements and density of 287 occupied homes, comes in at approximately $71,000 annually. I can defend that number in court. I'd add I think it's slightly conservative. The aggressive defensible number is closer to 78. 71 is fine, I said. 71 it is. She hung up. Reyes looked at me across the speaker. From 14.2 to 71 even. That's just over 5 times. The HOA's annual budget can absorb it, but only if they significantly raise dues or cut services. Either way, the residents are about to find out who's been collecting rent on the dirt under their feet. Good. You sure? I'm sure. He nodded. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and started drafting. While he drafted, I did something else. I went door to door. Not all 287. Just 6 houses. The 6 closest to my father's. The ones that had been there the longest, where I knew at least the last names from my childhood. I didn't tell anyone I owned anything. I told them I was Walter's son, that I was settling his estate, and that I wanted to know if they'd had any trouble with the HOA over the years that they'd be willing to put in writing. Mrs. Kowalski cried. She had paid the mailbox fine. She had also paid a $400 fine for a wreath on her door past January 15. She had paid an $850 fine for a bird feeder. She had been told 2 summers ago that if she didn't comply with a tree trimming order she couldn't afford, the HOA would lien her house. She gave me a written statement that ran to 2 pages. The young couple, Tom and Jess Whitaker, gave me their basketball hoop file, plus 3 other violation notices over 2 years, all under $500 but stacked into something that had nearly cost them their down payment savings. They wrote a statement together at their kitchen table while their toddler watched cartoons. A man named Dale, who I half remembered as a kid throwing a ball with my father over the fence, brought out a banker's box. 6 years of correspondence with the HOA over a fence post that was apparently 4 inches over a setback. He handed me the box and said, "If you can do anything with this, I don't want it back." The 5th house declined politely. The 6th was Henry Ellis. I sat on his porch in the late afternoon. He had iced tea in mason jars. He didn't say much for the first few minutes. Then he went inside and came out with a folder. "This is the Henderson file," he said. "Mrs. Henderson asked me to keep it after she sold. She's in Tucson now with her sister. I have her number if you want a sworn statement." I opened the folder. It was thick. There were violation notices, lien letters, a copy of the recorded lien, the foreclosure complaint, the forced sale paperwork, and a final settlement statement showing Mrs. Henderson had walked away with about 38 cents on the dollar. "Henry," I said quietly, "this is a pattern. That's why I kept it." I closed the folder. "There's one more thing I want you to see," I said. "But not yet. 2 weeks. I can wait 2 weeks." I drove home at dusk. The orange steak was still in my lawn. I sat at my father's table and laid the new statements out beside the certified deed copies and the recorded lease. 6 handwritten testimonies. 6 envelopes worth of paper trail. The Henderson file. And inside the Henderson file, on page 11, I found something I had not expected. A photocopy of a 2019 HOA Treasurer's Annual Report attached to one of the lien notices Mrs. Henderson had received. Mr. Ellis had probably never noticed it. It was just a back-page exhibit attached for reference. Standard inclusion. But there, halfway down a column titled Fixed Annual Obligations, was a single line item. Ground lease, Walter J. Cole, $14,200. The HOA's own internal financials. Year after year, they had always known they were tenants. Every board member who had ever signed a treasurer's report had known, including Marlene. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called Reyes. "Daniel, tell me." "They've known the whole time." A pause. Then a soft, slow laugh. The laugh of a lawyer who had just been handed the thing he didn't even need but was very glad to have. "Send me a copy tonight. We'll attach it to the notice. Are we ready?" 3 certified copies. Process server hand delivers to Marlene tomorrow morning. Certified mail to the HOA's registered agent same day. Filed copy at the county courthouse by Friday. "Do it." I hung up. I looked across the kitchen at the photo of my father on the wall, the one of him in 1981, leaning on a fence post on the back 40, before any of this had a clubhouse or a flag or a gavel. I sealed the certified envelope myself. Reyes had asked me, that afternoon in his office, if I was ready for what came next. I hadn't answered him then. I answered the empty room now. "She told me to ask the Henderson widow," I said quietly. I did. The orange steak leaned a little further in the dark. Tomorrow morning, the process server would knock on Marlene Pritchard's front door, and the woman who had hammered a violation flag into my father's lawn was going to learn for the first time in 9 years, as president of the Oak Ridge Estates Association, what it felt like to be the one being served. Scene 5. The tow at sunrise. The process server was supposed to knock on Marlene's door at 9 a.m., sharp on Thursday. He never got the chance. At 6:14 a.m., I woke up to the sound of a tow truck's hydraulics in my driveway. I didn't dream it. The house actually shook a little, that low metallic groan a flatbed makes when it's lifting weight. I pulled on jeans and a jacket, grabbed my phone, and went out the front door barefoot. There were 3 people on my lawn. A tow operator in a reflective vest, hooking my father's pickup to a winch. A second man, a private security guard from a different company than Wednesday's, holding a clipboard. And Marlene Pritchard, standing across the street in a beige raincoat, her phone held up at eye level, recording. A small crowd had gathered, maybe 9-10 neighbors, drawn out of their houses by the noise. Dale from down the street, Mrs. Kowalski in a robe, Henry Ellis on his porch, 3 doors down, already filming. Marlene saw me come out, and her voice rose to fill the morning. This is what happens when you ignore HOA authority. She projected it the way you project at a school board meeting. This vehicle has been declared abandoned on Association Common Area. Your house is next. Lien hearing is scheduled for next Wednesday. The operator was lifting the truck. I walked, barefoot, across my own grass to the edge of the driveway. I did not run. I did not raise my voice. I held up one hand to the tow operator. "Sir," I said, "stop the lift, please." He looked at me, at Marlene, at his clipboard. "This is a written authorization from the Oak Ridge Estates Association," he said, lifting a paper, "for removal of an abandoned vehicle from common area. Ma'am here signed it. That driveway is not common area. Ma'am here says it is. Ma'am here is wrong." Marlene's voice cut across the lawn. "Tow it." I looked at the operator. He was a man in his 40s, tired eyes, the look of someone who tows cars for a living, and would rather not be standing between 2 strangers in a driveway dispute at 6 in the morning. "What's your name?" I asked him. Mike. Mike. Before you complete that lift, I want you to do one thing for me. I want you to look at the curb. There's a line in the concrete. The white painted line that runs along the edge of the street. Everything past that line is private property under the recorded deed for this lot. The driveway is mine. You tow this truck. You and your company are on the hook for trespass and conversion. I'm a landowner, not a homeowner. There's a difference. Do you want me to show you the deed? His eyes flicked to Marlene, who was still recording, and back to me. He set the winch down. Show me the deed. I went inside, came back out with the manila envelope, opened it on the hood of his truck, and put my finger on the recorded plat. He read it for 10 seconds. He looked at the curb. He looked at the painted line. He looked at Marlene. Ma'am, he called across the street. This is a deeded private driveway. I can't tow off this property. You were paid to tow it. I'm refunding you. I'm not getting sued today. He started lowering the winch. Marlene crossed the street fast, raincoat flapping, phone still up. You will tow that vehicle, or I will report your company to... Ma'am, please step back from the equipment. The state board. I will have your license. You will... Ma'am, step back. She stepped back. Mike finished lowering my father's pickup, unhooked it, climbed into his rig without saying another word, and pulled away from the curb. The security guard with the clipboard looked at Marlene, looked at me, looked at the small crowd of neighbors with their phones up, and made the smart choice. He walked back to his car and left. That left Marlene, alone in my driveway, in a beige raincoat, at 6:23 a.m., with a phone still pointed at me. The crowd of neighbors didn't move. I want you to picture it. A woman who had spent 9 years running a 287 home subdivision like a duchy, standing on a piece of dirt that did not belong to her, having just publicly tried to seize property that was not hers to seize, in front of 10 witnesses, with her phone recording every second of it. For a long beat, nobody said anything. Then Marlene found her voice. It was an octave higher than usual. This is not over. The lien hearing is next Wednesday. You will lose this house. We foreclosed before. We'll foreclose again. Your father's name will not... Marlene. She stopped. You are recording yourself, I said quietly, on a private driveway, after directing a tow that didn't happen, in front of 10 neighbors, threatening to take a house. You should put the phone down. She looked at the phone. She looked at the neighbors. She did not put the phone down. Wednesday, she said. 7 p.m. Clubhouse. Be there. She walked back to her car at a pace that wanted to be a march, and ended up somewhere closer to a retreat. Door slam. Engine. Gone. Henry Ellis lowered his phone from his porch. He gave me one slow nod. Mrs. Kowalski clutched her robe at her throat and went back inside. The Whitakers' porch light clicked off. I stood in my driveway with my father's pickup, untowed, behind me, and I felt the morning air on my bare feet, and I thought, she did it on camera, and she didn't even know she did it. Inside, I called Reyes at 6:41. He picked up on the second ring. Tell me. I told him. He was quiet for 10 seconds. Then he said, did anyone film it? At least 3 neighbors. Henry Ellis got the whole thing from his porch. Maybe 40 minutes of footage. Get me copies. Today. Done. What about the rent notice? Hold the process server. I want to think for an hour. He called me back at 7:35. New plan. We don't serve her at her house this morning. She's expecting that now. We let her run the lien hearing Wednesday night. We let her vote the foreclosure resolution. We let her gavel it. We do not interfere. You want her to record a foreclosure resolution against me on the public record. I want her to record a foreclosure resolution against you after I serve her the rent adjustment notice. We serve Tuesday afternoon. 48 hours notice on file before her hearing. Every action she takes Wednesday night becomes willful, post-notice, on the record bad faith. Every fine, every vote, every gavel becomes a sanctionable act. I sat with that for a minute. The kitchen was very quiet. You're going to let her dig the hole in front of witnesses. I'm going to let her dig the hole in front of all of them. Then, we go to court Tuesday morning the following week with a deed, a recorded lease, a $71,000 appraisal, 6 neighbor affidavits, the Henderson file, the 2019 Treasurer's Report, this morning's tow video, and a foreclosure resolution that was voted on by a board that had been on notice for 6 days that the land underneath them did not belong to them. Daniel. Yes. Do it. I'm faxing the rent notice to the process server now. He'll hand-deliver to Marlene at the HOA office Tuesday at 4 p.m. Certified mail to the registered agent the same hour. County filing first thing Wednesday morning. And then we let her run her little hearing. I hung up. I went outside. The orange stake from Wednesday was still in my lawn. The driveway was empty except for my father's truck, which was now slightly crooked from the half-completed lift. That afternoon, the certified mail came. A new envelope from the HOA. Notice of intent to lien amended. Total now, $7,590, $4,750 in original fines, $640 in tow operator reimbursement the cost of the tow that hadn't happened, $2,200 in administrative escalation fees, 14 days, or lien filed and foreclosure proceedings begin. I put the new envelope on top of the others in the Oak Ridge receipts folder. I took a long, slow breath. Reyes had told me earlier on the phone, every fine she files after she's been served the rent notice is going to become evidence of bad faith. That was Tuesday's plan, but she had filed this one Thursday afternoon, before service, which meant it wasn't bad faith yet. It was just stupid. That was fine. Tuesday afternoon, 4 p.m., the process server would knock on the HOA office door. Wednesday night, 7 p.m., Marlene would walk into the clubhouse and run a foreclosure hearing against a man who, by then, would already legally be her landlord. I sat at my father's kitchen table that night. I lined the receipts up in order. Deed, lease, assignment, treasurer's report, 6 affidavits, appraisal, Henderson file. Today's tow footage. On a thumb drive Henry Ellis had walked over personally at lunchtime. I looked at the manila envelope holding the rent adjustment notice. 3 sealed copies inside. Notice of adjustment of annual ground rent section 7.4. I tapped the top copy once with my finger. Tomorrow, Marlene finds out who's actually in charge of Oak Ridge. The orange stake outside the window stood in the lawn, leaning a little more, like it had given up trying to mean what it had meant on Wednesday. I went to bed early. The lien hearing was 6 days away. Scene 6. The lien hearing and the sealed envelope. By Tuesday afternoon, every door in Oak Ridge Estates had a flyer on it. I know because Henry Ellis brought me one, taped to the brick beside his front door that morning, peeled off carefully so the corners didn't tear. Public Lion Hearing Oak Ridge Estates Association versus the Walter property Wednesday 7 p.m. Clubhouse all homeowners encouraged to attend. The header was in red. There was a small graphic of a gavel. She wants an audience, Henry said. She's going to get one. You ready for tomorrow? I'm ready for tonight. Tonight was 4 p.m. Tuesday. The process server's appointment. Reyes had used a man named Carl, who had been serving papers in this county for 31 years. At 4:02 p.m., according to Carl's affidavit, he walked into the Oak Ridge Estates Association management office, asked for Marlene Pritchard by name, presented her with a sealed envelope marked Notice of Adjustment of Annual Ground Rent Section 7.40 Oak Ridge Estates Parcel, obtained her signature acknowledging receipt, and left. According to Henry, who heard it from a neighbor whose daughter worked in the office, Marlene opened it, read the first page, set it down, picked it up, read it again, and then sat in her chair without speaking for 40 minutes. She did not cancel the hearing. I have thought about that a lot, in the months since. She had 40 hours between receipt of that notice and the gavel coming down on Wednesday night. She had her own attorney's number. She had the option to postpone, to consult, to walk into Wednesday's meeting and announce a recess. She had every off-ramp a person could be given. She took none of them. I think she didn't believe it. I think she sat at her desk on Tuesday afternoon, read a notice telling her that the underlying land of every home in Oak Ridge Estates was privately owned, that the new fee-simple owner had adjusted the annual ground rent from $14,200 to $71,000 effective in 30 days, that the document had been drafted by Daniel Reyes, recorded at the courthouse, and certified mailed to the registered agent, and she decided it was a bluff. I think she decided to call it. I sat at my father's kitchen table Wednesday evening at 6:30, putting on a clean shirt, sliding the manila envelope into the inner pocket of my jacket. The envelope held one sealed copy of the same notice Carl had handed her on Tuesday, a courtesy duplicate, in case anyone in the room wanted to verify. The orange stake was still in my lawn. I left it. I drove to the clubhouse alone. No Reyes. He wanted to be on his phone in his office, ready, but not visible. They need to think you're alone, he had said. Let them swing. The parking lot was full at 6:45. People were carrying folding chairs in from their cars. The clubhouse held maybe 60 people comfortably, and there were already 80 in there when I walked through the door, with more standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. The basketball hoop husband, Tom Whitaker, was holding the door for elderly residents. Mrs. Kowalski sat in the front row with her hands in her lap. Henry Ellis was in the back, in his Marine Corps cap, arms folded. I took a folding chair in the middle of the room. The board sat at the long table, Marlene at the center, 2 members on either side. The secretary, with her steno pad, looking like a woman who had not slept well. Marlene had gotten a manicure. Her hair was set. She had brought her own water bottle. Her face was the wrong color, though. Underneath the foundation, she was gray. She gavelled at 7-1. "This is a special hearing of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association," she said, reading from prepared remarks. "Convened to address the matter of the Walter property at 142 Maple Crest Drive, owned by Walter J. Cole, deceased, currently occupied by his son, Mr. Cole. The board has issued multiple violation notices, fines totaling $7,590, and an intent to lien notice that has gone unanswered for the statutory period." The room was silent. People were watching her. People were also watching me. I could feel it. The board now moves to record a lien against the Walter property and authorize foreclosure proceedings, in accordance with the association's bylaws. A board member to her left, a balding man in a polo shirt. Name tag Richard cleared his throat. He leaned over and whispered something to her. She shook her head sharply, without looking at him. All in favor. Hands went up. 5. Opposed. 2 hands. One was Richard. The other was a younger woman at the end of the table whose name I didn't know yet. She kept her hand up longer than she needed to. The motion carries 5-2. Foreclosure paperwork files Monday morning. We will now... Madam President. It was Henry Ellis. From the back. Marlene's head snapped up. "Mr. Ellis, this is not the public comment portion. Madam President, you just voted a foreclosure resolution against a homeowner who hasn't been allowed to speak. State law requires you grant the homeowner an opportunity to respond before the resolution is finalized." Her jaw tightened. The secretary's pen had stopped moving again. "Mr. Cole," Marlene said, biting the words. "Do you have a final statement before the resolution is recorded?" I stood up. I walked, slowly, from the middle of the room to the long table. I did not address the room. I did not address her. I reached into my jacket, took out the manila envelope, and placed it on the table directly in front of her. Then I started walking toward the exit. "Mr. Cole, what is this?" I didn't answer. I kept walking. "Mr. Cole, what is this?" I reached the back of the room. I turned around. "Read it, Marlene. The board should see it before Monday." She looked at the envelope like it was a small animal. She looked at me. The room was utterly silent. 80 people were watching her hands. She tore it open. She unfolded the first page. She read it. Her eyes moved fast at first, then slowed, then stopped. She read it again. The color left her face entirely. The foundation made it look strange, almost theatrical, like makeup on someone who had fainted. Richard, the board member to her left, leaned over and looked at the page. "Marlene," he said, What is this?" She did not answer. The younger woman at the end of the table stood up partway, looked at the page over Richard's shoulder, and sat back down very slowly. "Marlene," Richard said, louder, "what does this say?" The room was waiting. Marlene's mouth opened, closed, opened. "It's this, is some kind of fraudulent document. It's recorded at the county courthouse," I said from the back of the room. "Recorder's stamp is in the upper right corner. You're holding a courtesy copy. You were served the original yesterday, at 4 o'clock. You didn't. Carl, from Whitfield Process Service. You signed for it. The signature is in his affidavit. This is..." "Marlene," I kept my voice exactly level. "There's a phone number for my attorney on the second page. I'd suggest you call him before Monday. We're already on his calendar Tuesday morning at the courthouse, 10 a.m. We'll see you there." "You can't. You don't. You just voted a foreclosure resolution against a property whose underlying land is owned by the man you were trying to foreclose on. You voted it 26 hours after being served. Notice that the land's annual ground rent has been adjusted to $71,000 under a clause your association signed in 1992. The vote is on the record. The resolution will be filed Monday morning per your motion. The court will see it Tuesday." I stopped at the door. I did not raise my voice once. I did not need to. The room was so quiet, you could hear the fluorescent lights. "You should have postponed this hearing, Marlene. You had 40 hours. I opened the door. Behind me, I heard Richard say, very quietly, "Oh my God." I heard the younger board member at the end of the table say, "I want my no vote in the minutes. I want it in the minutes right now." I heard Marlene say, in a voice that had finally lost its shape, "Strike the resolution. Strike. Strike. Strike." "You can't strike a recorded vote," Henry Ellis said from the back, calm as a Sunday morning. "You called it. The minutes have it." I let the door close behind me. Outside, the parking lot was cool. The sodium lights buzzed the way they had buzzed the night Marlene had cornered me with 2 board members at her shoulders. Tonight she was inside, at a long table, holding a piece of paper that had taken 32 years and one developer's mistake to find its way to her hands. I walked to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a minute without starting it. Through the clubhouse windows, I could see people standing up, pointing at the table. The secretary was scribbling fast. Tom Whitaker had his phone out. Mrs. Kowalski had not moved. I started the truck. I drove out of the lot, past the residents only sign, past 287 houses whose owners were about to learn what their HOA had been pretending for 32 years, past my father's lawn where the orange stake leaned at an angle that, by the porch light, looked almost apologetic. 6 days from a lien hearing to a courthouse. Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. She was going to come because she didn't have a choice anymore, and she was going to come without the gavel. Scene 7 Courthouse. Tuesday morning. The courthouse was a brick building from 1958, with a flag out front and a metal detector inside the lobby that always beeped, no matter what you put through it. I got there at 9:30 with Reyes. He was carrying a leather case the size of a small suitcase. I was carrying nothing. He had told me on the drive in, "You don't speak unless I ask you to. You don't react unless I tell you to. Today is not your day to talk. Today is my day." I sat where he told me to sit. Second row, behind the petitioner's table. The gallery filled fast. Tom and Jess Whitaker came in with a stroller. Mrs. Kowalski came in with 2 other widows from her cul-de-sac. Dale came in with the banker's box that had once been on his porch and now had a Reyes Law Office sticker on the corner. Richard from the board came in alone, in a different polo than Wednesday's, and sat as far from the HOA's table as physically possible. The younger board member, who had voted no, came in with her husband and sat behind Richard. By 9:55, there were 31 residents in the gallery. I counted. Marlene came in at 9:58, with a man in a navy suit, who looked like he had spent the weekend reading a 1,992 ground lease, and not enjoying any of it. His name, Reyes told me later, was Brian Halverson. He had been the HOA's general counsel for 6 years, and had clearly only ever handled fence disputes. Marlene sat down at the respondents' table. She did not look at the gallery. She did not look at me. She looked at the wood grain on the table. Judge Patricia Alvarez took the bench at 10-2. She had 30 years on the civil bench, half glasses, and 0 patience for theatrics. She read the file in front of her for 90 seconds without speaking. Then she looked up. "Mr. Reyes, your motion." Reyes stood. He did not open his case. He did not lay out exhibits. He did not flip through pages. He spoke one sentence. "Your Honor, the underlying land of every home in Oak Ridge Estates is privately owned by my client. The Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association is, and has always been, a tenant on that land, under a recorded ground lease." The judge raised one eyebrow. "Mr. Halverson?" Halverson stood, slowly. He had a folder in his hand. He set it down. He picked it up. He put it down again. "Your Honor, we're prepared to acknowledge the existence of a 1,992 recorded lease." "Acknowledge." "Yes, Your Honor. You are conceding, on the record, that the Oak Ridge Estates Association has been a lessee on the underlying land of its own subdivision for 32 years. "Yes, Your Honor." A small sound came from the respondent's table. It might have been Marlene's chair. Judge Alvarez looked at her for a long second. "Mr. Reyes, continue." He continued. He handed up the certified deed, the recorded 1,992 lease, the 2004 assignment, the probate order transferring fee, simple to me. The judge looked at each one for under 10 seconds. She had clearly read them at her desk before walking in. They were entered into the record. Then Reyes began the cascade. "Your Honor, Exhibit 5. He held up a single page. This is the Oak Ridge Estates Association's own 2019 Treasurer's Annual Report. Halfway down the column titled Fixed Annual Obligations, there is a single line item. Ground lease. Walter J. Cole, $14,200. We have similar reports from 2013 through 2023. The association's own financials demonstrate that every board, every president, every treasurer, for at least 11 consecutive years, has documented in writing their knowledge that the association is a tenant. He set the page down. He did not pause for effect. He moved to the next. Exhibit 6. The Henderson File. Mrs. Eleanor Henderson, a widow on a fixed income, was foreclosed on by the Oak Ridge Estates Association in 2023 over a fence violation that began at $1,200 and compounded into a forced sale at 38 cents on the dollar. The president who recorded that lien, who signed that foreclosure complaint, and who personally benefited from the resale was Marlene Pritchard. Exhibit 6A is a sworn affidavit from Mrs. Henderson, taken last Friday by phone in Tucson, Arizona, attaching the full file. Halverson's pen stopped moving. Exhibit 7. 6 sworn statements from Oak Ridge homeowners detailing a 6-year pattern of fines, lien threats, and bad faith escalation under President Pritchard's tenure. They are from Mrs. Kowalski, Tom, and Jessica Whitaker, Dale Marston, and 3 others present in this courtroom today. 3 rows behind me, somebody's hand went up briefly, then down. Mrs. Kowalski's. The judge saw it. Exhibit 8. Reyes held up a thumb drive. 41 minutes of video, recorded from a private residence on Maple Crest Drive at 6:14 a.m. last Thursday morning, depicting President Pritchard directing a tow company to remove my client's vehicle from a deeded private driveway, threatening foreclosure publicly in front of 9 witnesses, and stating, quote, "Your house is next." The witnesses include the homeowner 3 doors down, a retired Marine named Henry Ellis, who was here today and prepared to testify. Henry Ellis nodded once from the gallery. He didn't stand. He didn't need to. Exhibit 9. The minutes of the Oak Ridge Estates Association lien hearing held last Wednesday at 7:00 p.m., 26 hours after President Pritchard was personally served by a licensed process server with a signed acknowledgement of receipt, a notice of adjustment of annual ground rent under Section 7.4 of the 1,992 ground lease. At that hearing, with full knowledge of the rent adjustment, President Pritchard moved a foreclosure resolution against my client's property and called the vote 5-2 in favor. He set the page down. Your Honor, the resolution she voted on a week ago to foreclose on my client was a resolution to foreclose on the man who owns the dirt under her own subdivision. She had been served notice of that fact the previous afternoon. The vote was willful, post-notice, and on the record. Halverson was looking at his client. His client was looking at the table. Judge Alvarez took off her half glasses. Miss Pritchard. Marlene's head came up. Stand, please. Marlene stood. You served foreclosure papers on the man who owns the ground your subdivision sits on, after he served you a rent adjustment notice. Is that a correct summary of the timeline? Your Honor, I believed at the time that the document was. That isn't what I asked. Is the timeline accurate? Yes, Your Honor. There's no ambush here, Miss Pritchard. There's recklessness. Sit down. Marlene sat down. The motion was not graceful. The judge began to rule from the bench. She did it the way she did everything, fast, level, no theater. The lien proposed against the Walter property is void. The fines totaling $7,590 are void. The foreclosure resolution voted on by the Oak Ridge Estates Association last Wednesday is void and is to be expunged from the association's records by Friday. The notice of adjustment of annual ground rent under Section 7.4 of the 1,992 ground lease, dated last Tuesday, is valid and effective. The new annual ground rent of $71,000 is enforceable, as of 30 days from the date of service. The association is ordered to reimburse Mr. Cole's tow expenses, legal fees, and to make whole any homeowner whose fines were collected in bad faith over the past 6 years, pending separate audit. I am referring Mr. Halverson's filings to the State Bar for review of the foreclosure resolution he allowed his client to vote on 6 days after receiving notice of the rent adjustment. Halverson exhaled audibly. The judge looked at the gallery. This courtroom is also referring the Oak Ridge Estates Association's pattern of liens and foreclosures to the state HOA regulator for formal investigation. She struck the gavel once. Adjourned. The room did not erupt. That isn't what happens in real courtrooms. What happens is much quieter. People exhale. People look at each other. A board member in a different polo stands up in the gallery and says, "On the record, Your Honor. For the record, I voted no on the lien." A young woman 2 seats down from him stands up and says, "I voted no as well." The bailiff nods them back into their seats. Mrs. Kowalski was crying, quietly, into a tissue she had been holding in her hand for 2 hours. Marlene did not stand up. She did not move. Halverson put his hand on her elbow and tried to guide her to her feet, and she finally got up, slowly, and walked out of the courtroom past the gallery. Nobody booed. Nobody clapped. They just watched her go, the way people watch something they have stopped being afraid of. Outside, on the courthouse steps, 6 or 7 residents came up to me at the same time. Tom Whitaker held the stroller in one hand and stuck out the other. "What does this mean for our HOA dues?" Mrs. Kowalski asked. I had been thinking about that answer for 2 weeks. "Your association has to find about $57,000 more in ground rent this year," I said. "How they raise it is up to your board. But I'd suggest a new board." Henry Ellis, behind her, smiled for the first time since I'd met him. I got into Reyes's car. He was already in the driver's seat. "You okay?" he asked. I looked at the courthouse. I thought about my father, sitting at his kitchen table in pencil, writing $14,200 in a ledger every year for 20 years, and never raising it once. "Now we set the rules right," I said. Reyes started the car. Scene 8. The stake in the kitchen corner. 2 weeks later, Judge Alvarez issued her written order. Reyes brought a copy to my father's kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon. 23 pages, double-sided, signed at the bottom by a woman who did not waste words. The lien was vacated. The $7,590 in fines was refunded with interest. The foreclosure resolution was expunged. The notice of adjustment of annual ground rent was confirmed enforceable at $71,000 per year. The Oak Ridge Estates Association was ordered to pay $14,800 in legal fees, $640 in tow reimbursement, and to commission a full audit of every fine and lien collected under Marlene Pritchard's 9-year presidency. The state HOA regulator opened its investigation a week later. The state bar opened a separate file on Brian Halverson for the Wednesday night vote. He resigned from the Oak Ridge account inside 48 hours. The audit took 4 months. When it was finished, the new board sent certified letters to 43 current and former Oak Ridge homeowners. 43 families had paid fines that the audit determined to have been levied in bad faith under the Pritchard presidency. The total came to $61,400 in refunds, plus interest. The board voted unanimously to pay every cent. Mrs. Eleanor Henderson, in Tucson, received a check for $39,200 with a handwritten note from the new board president, apologizing on behalf of the association. She called Henry Ellis the day it arrived. He told me later she had cried for 10 minutes, and then said, "Tell Walter's boy thank you. I was not on the call. I am glad I was not." The recall vote happened in October, 84-9. Marlene was removed as president. 2 of her closest allies on the board resigned the same week, rather than face the recall. The new board was elected the following Tuesday. Henry Ellis ran for treasurer, unopposed, and won. Richard, the polo shirt board member who had whispered Marlene, "What is this?" at the lien hearing, became vice president. The young woman who had voted no twice became secretary. At their first meeting in November, the new board read the 1,992 ground lease aloud, in full, in the same clubhouse where Marlene had once gavelled fines for garden gnomes. They read every page. They read section 7.4 last. Then the new president, a soft-spoken woman named Patricia, who had moved to Oak Ridge in 2011 and never been to a board meeting before that night, said into the microphone, "No homeowner in Oak Ridge will ever again be told what the dirt under their feet is or isn't by anyone, including me." The room applauded. It was the first time, Henry told me, anyone had clapped at an Oak Ridge board meeting in a decade. Marlene moved out of the neighborhood in December. Her house went on the market the week after the recall and sold in 11 days at a small loss. She did not say goodbye to anyone because there was no one to say goodbye to. The realtor's sign came down 2 days before Christmas, and a young couple with a baby moved in the first weekend of January. They put a wreath on the door. Mrs. Kowalski brought them banana bread. I kept my father's house. I had thought, before any of this happened, that I would settle the estate, sell the house and the leased land in some clean transaction, and go back to my own life, 2 states away. I changed my mind sometime in the week between the lien hearing and the courthouse. I hadn't decided why yet. By the time the audit results came back, I had decided. I split my time, half there, half home. The annual ground rent comes in every January now, in a single check from the Oak Ridge Estates Association, signed by Henry Ellis as treasurer. $71,000, on time, every year. He hands it to me in person, sometimes with a slice of his wife's apple pie on the passenger seat of his truck. I sign the receipt. We sit on the porch. I don't talk much about what the money does. Some of it goes to keeping the house up. Some of it goes to a small scholarship at the county college in my father's name, for kids whose families work the land. Some of it sits in an account against the day, 18 years from now, when the 1,992 lease comes up for renewal, and the Oak Ridge community will sit down with me to negotiate the next 50 years. I have already told the new board, in writing, that the renewal will be fair, that the rent will track inflation and not opportunism, and that the deed will not leave my family while I am alive. My father would have liked that, I think. The orange stake sits in the corner of the kitchen now, behind the door, leaned against the wall. I didn't pull it out of the lawn for 3 weeks after the courthouse. Then, one Saturday morning I went out, worked it loose with both hands, brushed the dirt off the bottom, and brought it inside. I don't know why exactly. It seemed wrong to throw it out. It seemed wronger to put it on a shelf. The corner of the kitchen, behind the door, felt right. Visitors don't notice it. Henry noticed it the first time he came over after, and he didn't say anything. He just looked at it, then looked at me, then looked away. That was enough. The lawn where Marlene drove it in is just lawn now. Kids cut across it sometimes on their way to the cul-de-sac. One of the Whitaker boys lost a baseball under the porch in May, and I helped him fish it out. Mrs. Kowalski waves from her mailbox. Dale brought me a bag of tomatoes in August. The Henderson house, 3 streets over, has a different family in it now, but Eleanor herself drove up from Tucson last spring to see Henry, and she stopped by my porch for 30 minutes on her way out of town. She did not cry. She had cried enough. We talked about my father for a while. She told me he had once helped her husband fix a transmission in 1996. I had not known that. She left me a card. The card just said, "Thank you, Walter's boy." I keep it in the manila envelope, next to the deed. The clubhouse, where Marlene had once gavelled foreclosure on a man who owned the dirt under her feet, hosts the new board's quarterly community readings now. They read the lease. They read the bylaws. They read the financials, line by line. Anyone who wants to ask a question is allowed to ask it. The secretary writes every question into the minutes, even the ones nobody likes. There is no gavel on the table anymore. The new board voted it out. It sits in a glass case in the lobby, beside a small printed card that says Oak Ridge Estates Association, 1992 to 2024. Lessons learned. I sat on my porch one evening late in the first summer, with Henry, drinking coffee. The orange stake was inside the kitchen, behind the door. The sun was going down over what used to be cattle pasture, and was now a sea of 2-car garages. Every roofline I could see sitting on dirt my father had kept in the family for 51 years. Henry took a sip of his coffee. "Your dad would have loved this," he said. I thought about it for a second. "He would have fined Marlene first," I said, "then loved it." Henry laughed. It was a good laugh, the kind a man earns slowly over a long life and uses sparingly. I looked across the lawn where the stake had stood, and at the kitchen window where it now leaned in the corner, and at the roof lines of 287 homes whose owners had finally been told the truth about the ground beneath them. My father had bought 1,300 acres in 1973, thinking he was leaving us property. It turned out he was leaving us peace. End of script.